Hello and welcome to another edition of this week's Labrats. So before we get into this week's experiment, I actually want to show you a little bit of a concept, a teachable moment, if you will, that arrived from my own negligence. So these are my bean plants, and as you can see, these ones are no longer alive. They are dead, and this one is still hanging on. So this is actually my dark plant, and this is my light plant. And so about a week and a half ago, we decided to move it into a spare bedroom because it has more light, and we were thinking, oh yes, they'll grow and they'll be so happy. We forgot about them for an entire week and didn't water them. And this is what happened. So obviously these plants are dead, but the dark one survived. It was in for the exact same amount of time, had the exact same amount of non-water because they weren't watered at all, until I remembered, and I was like, oh my goodness, my plants, and I went running in, and it was actually the dark plant that had survived through this. So you're probably thinking, why did the dark plant die and the light plant survive? That's because of something called natural selection. So natural selection is a process in which organisms are either more fit to live in their environment or they are not. So because these guys had the perfect conditions, they were always watered, they had a lot of light, as soon as they were put into an environment where they didn't have any of those things, they died. This guy has been living a very hard life. He already had no sunlight. I forgot to water him all the time because he was like in my closet. And because of that, he actually survived. This is actually how evolution takes place. Organisms that live or organisms that can survive through tough times, difficult times, times when things are really, really rough and there's maybe not a lot of resources, will survive and produce more offspring that are also more fit for their environment. This is actually a fundamental part of evolution that you're actually seeing here right now. So I thought that was really cool. Another thing that you might notice is that this plant has actually turned green. The last time we looked at it, it was white. So the reason that it all of a sudden has a lot of pigment is because of chlorophyll. So plants have chlorophyll. It's like a pigment in their tissues that make them green. If they don't have sunlight, they don't produce it. So the fact that this guy now is green is because he's now in sunlight and he can produce chlorophyll and he's now photosynthesizing. So I'm going to put this guy in some soil. We're going to see if we can get him to survive. So next time we look at him, he's going to be potted. So you can do that with your bean plants. You can actually pot them and see if you can get them maybe producing some flowers to eventually make some bean plants. Okay. So now that we have that out of the way, we're going to actually look at what our experiment is today. So our experiment this week is about osmosis, and osmosis is essentially the movement of water. So water can move, and it's the movement of water through a semi-permeable membrane. This is a bit of a difficult concept to understand. So what I did is I actually filled a balloon full of water. So our cells do this. This is actually how our bodies work on the cellular level. They are basically a balloon filled with water. That is what you can think of cells. They are a balloon filled with water, so I've filled this balloon with water. And there will be a certain amount of salts and whatnot inside the cell, and there will be a certain amount of salts and whatnot on the outside of the cell. Depending on how much of those salts there are, that water will move either from outside of the cell or inside of the cell. Water wants to move from an area of high concentration, from an area of low concentration to an area of high concentration. So if we put a bunch of salt in this, the water would want to move this way. If we put a bunch of salt out here, the water would want to move into the cell. So we're going to explore that because this is a really important concept to understand actually how everything lives. So what I did today is I gave you some potatoes, and I asked you to cut those potatoes up and to make a solution that had a bunch of salt in it, and to make a solution that's basically just water. So in your water example, there's not a whole lot of salt in it. Obviously, if you put a bunch of salt in your water, it's going to have a lot of salt in it. And then I asked you to submerge those pieces of potato inside the solutions and to leave it for about 24 hours and see what happens. This is my salt solution. This is my pure water solution. So when you take these potato slices, you can see that they're really crisp. You can break them, right? They're really, really crisp. There's a reason for that, and it's because of osmosis. When we look at these ones that are in salt, they're super bendy, right? You can bend them, and it's because of osmosis. So all of the water that are inside of these potato cells has left the cells, which is why they're bendy. There's no water left in them. They've left the cells because there was more salt outside of the cell than inside, so all the water rushed out of the cells into the surrounding water. With these guys, there's actually more salt inside the cells than there is in the water that's surrounding it. So all of the water rushes into the cells and it makes them really, really like plump and moist, and there's a whole bunch of water inside the cells. So this is the basic concept that I want you to understand. These guys, the water has run into the cells. These guys, because of the salt in the water's run out of the cells. Okay, and this is actually how cells transport nutrients and water and everything else that allows us to survive all around our bodies. They basically are constantly passing things back and forth between the cell membrane. So there's a membrane, they're always moving things back and forth based on the concentration, and that is actually how we live at a cellular level. So next week what we're going to do is we're going to do more or less the same experiment but with a different plant, and we're going to look at it under our microscope so you can actually see on the molecular level what this looks like, because the cells in the salt are actually going to be shriveled and tiny. You'll be able to see that, and these ones are going to be really, really, really big and filled with water. So we're going to look at that next week. So, you know, just if you need to keep reading what exactly osmosis is or ask any questions about it, feel free to put those in the comment section below on this video, and I'll see you guys next week.